right, another round of applause for Eric. All right, how's everybody doing? I know we're getting towards the second half of our last day. I hope everyone's still energetic. I just drank a couple more espressos, so I'm ready to go. All right, next up, he's the co-founder of Konfio, Mr. Martin Warner.
Thank you. Okay, so today I'd like to talk to you about regulated DeFi. It's a bit of a strange topic to bring up because I guess DeFi is, hey, it's global. We're blockchain. We don't need rules, right? Well, we actually do. That's the way you get institutions in. And the term institutional DeFi came up earlier in the year when someone coined the term for bringing in that institutional money into DeFi, and that represents a whole load more money coming in. So we're going beyond just the traditional crypto community that it's like, you know, the people that invest, it's like this is a large amount of money coming in. And they need to come in and they have to adopt some kind of regulations, otherwise they can't come in. And the people that are tackling this so far, there's quite a few people at it. So like we got Aave Pro announced their institutional DeFi. They're creating like a whitelisted group. So Fireblocks will do the KYC and AML. And that's going to create a pool for the institutions to do DeFi, as it were. You've got Swarm Markets doing something similar with the KYC. They're fully BaFin regulated, and they are making sure that whoever comes onto their protocol to trade DeFi is accredited. And yeah, a good thing. Alliance Block's doing the same, and then you've got the crypto banks like Sabre and Signum, who are providing like the whole service for institutions, for the custody, for the onboarding, and they're providing an institutional DeFi service. So why aren't more institutions doing DeFi, as it were? So why isn't all that money, like the thousands of trillions of dollars that's floating around in traditional markets, why isn't it coming onto DeFi more often, or more of it? So if we look at why institutions aren't coming on, they're heavily regulated. They're blocked. They need to really demonstrate KYC and AML. It's an important part for them. If they can't say who's on the other side of the trade, they can't really comply with anti-money laundering, and it stands in the way of it. The other small issue is the size of markets and liquidity. Institutions tend to trade large blocks, so tens, hundreds of millions, rather than tens of thousands. So they're the kind of two issues that are really keeping out DeFi, or institutions out of DeFi. So when you take a step back and you look at regulations, what are the key concerns that regulators have? They really care about fair and orderly markets, so to protect that the markets are really a place to do business, that we're not full of people cheating. So it's quite ironic when you think the first piece of legislation that actually came out in Amsterdam, the first stock exchange they had there was in 1610. 400 years later, we're still regulating, people are still cheating, and you only have to look back to the LIBOR scandal of 2012, seeing billions of fines that the banks paid. So that to me is evidence that the human instinct, or the natural instinct in this market is to cheat, and the regulators are there to make sure that they catch them out, they prevent it, and do something about it. And we also see, like in crypto, when there's no real regulations, we see a lot of volatility because people can arrange attacks in the market. They can do all sorts of things like front running. They can do pump and dump schemes and so on. So really, the best way to sort of dampen that down a bit and to be able to make people accountable, you do need to link address somehow to an identity. So if someone is really sort of manipulating the markets, we can then say, well, look, we know it's you, you're misbehaving, out, or get a fine, or whatever is appropriate. The second piece is very important as well, is the investor protections. The regulators do spend a lot of time making sure that when retail investors invest, whatever they invest in is suitable, and they put obligations on the institutions to make sure what they're buying is something they understand and it meets their investment criteria. They also need to check the origin of funds, because we don't really want criminal money flowing through the systems. In fact, in traditional markets, they estimate there's about 2 trillion that flows through the markets there that has origins in corruption, proceeds of crime, and so on. So it's an ongoing battle. You could argue they're losing it, but 2 trillion in the scheme of things isn't a huge amount. Again, the way to do the KYC is to understand what the investor actually wants to do, what their risk appetite is, whether they have the experience in the markets, do they fully understand what the risks of a derivative is, what is a leveraged position, do they understand what they could possibly lose, are they prepared to lose their capital even. So these are requirements that you need to really have in place. And that's only possible on blockchain if we have that link between identity and blockchain. So the overlap between the two key regulatory concerns is really knowing who's who on the market. And that doesn't mean to say it has to be centralized, but we need to figure out a way to do this. The other thing is, DeFi is has come under a lot more scrutiny in the last year. So we've seen actions on Binance, Uniswap to being looked at, Coinbase is being examined, and so on. So the regulators are starting to wake up to DeFi being actually quite a large market. It's becoming important. It's no longer going under the radar like it did at one point. Then if we look specifically in Europe, we have MiCA coming up. And how will this affect DeFi? This is a big question. So it's obviously not being implemented yet, but it's pointing to the fact that DeFi protocols will have to be linked to an entity which will have to create or have to have some kind of license. So I think medium to long term, the idea of having DAOs or governance tools and saying, hey, we're fully decentralized won't really wash within the European Union, certainly. And I guess we need to look at how we can continue the innovation of DeFi and bring on all the good things that we've innovated and built over the past sort of 18 months and look at the requirements of MiCA. So rather than looking at it as a centralization project, we can look at MiCA and the European regulations as being something localized. It can be applied to here, and then there'll be a different regulatory regime elsewhere or other parts of the world. So these were a lot of the thoughts behind what we're doing with T-Grade. So we wanted to actually take on these issues and really do something about it from a protocol level. So it's important not only from the regulatory pressure to actually do something with DeFi and have some frameworks around that, but also to enable traditional finance to come onto and take part in DeFi and be a part of that ecosystem. So the key part was balancing decentralization with local regulations through self-sovereign frameworks, which is a big, long sentence and probably doesn't mean anything to anyone. But the idea of the self-sovereign was key. So anyone has the ability to set up groups, which is part of what we're doing. I'll go through it very quickly and then come back and do the detail. But essentially, what we're wanting to do is to have a mechanism where you can set up a group, whitelist it, and you're in charge of that as a business. It's not the protocol doing that. It's not T-Grade, but T-Grade is a platform to enable that. So if we take a local example, it could be a series of Portuguese fund managers could decide to get together, create a whitelisted group on T-Grade, add their customers in there, and then they can go back to the Portuguese regulator and say, we are in control here, we're accountable, we know who's on there, we know that no bad actors or no unknown people can actually trade in our protocol. And they do this. We made a conscious decision to keep all the compliance, all the identity verification off-chain. It's really important that it is done on a local basis. So what might be compliance in Lisbon might not be compliance in Lagos, for example. There may be subtle regional differences or local differences depending on the regulatory regime. And it's really important then to have a generic thing there that each one can implement in their own way. And there may be cases where some standards are, they don't have clear registers of people. They may need to do other ways of doing KYC rather than impose a central KYC system. So the off-chain processes are very important. That meets the needs for investor protection, and you can do all the complete checks off-chain. We then take that identity and link it to the blockchain address, and that's the important thing. The governance mechanisms then shows that this address was added by this group using this governance process, the votes were conducted, the quorum was met, the threshold was met, etc. So it's a full governance process, it's on-chain, and anyone can see that it's been done. We then take the next step when we have a group, we have a whitelisted group of people, and we permission DeFi protocols to the trusted circles. So this then means you've got the means to issue protocols, issue digital assets, create your own DeFi, or make local copies or local versions for specific trusted circles. So again, back to the Portuguese one, we could create some nice DeFi protocols which are suitable for investors here that could get regulatory clearance. And the entity setting up the trusted circle will be probably a regulated institution or would need a license, would sort all that out off-chain, use these mechanisms, issue the DeFi protocol, and off you go. You may then also be able to apply for passporting and get it European-wide and maybe expand your trusted circle further using your branch network or using another way of identifying people. So once you know who's in your trusted circle, you then have oversight on who's misbehaving, like I alluded to earlier. So if you've got people who are really misbehaving, you then know you can trace that blockchain address back to a real identity, and you can then take the appropriate sanction, make the appropriate sanctions. So the reason for knowing who's who is, like I say, it meets that fair and orderly markets criteria. So that ecosystem together of the self-sovereign, anyone can create a group. You create multiple groups depending on investor class, asset class, combination of both. So you could have a group just for fixed income, one for options, one for futures, one for complex DeFi applications. It's up to you as the trusted circle administrator how you want to organize that. And that's the important part, that it's done at the protocol level. Secondly, the issuance of the DeFi protocol means that unlike the other sort of regulated DeFi option or solutions, is you're not creating the garden wall around existing products. So if you look at the popular DeFi protocols, you don't really know how these tokens were created. Where was the origin of funds? Who popped the ether into the first DAI, for example? So if you're dealing with a DAI, where does it come from? Where's that money come from? But if you're actually issuing it within your own trusted circle, you start with a clean product because you know all the money coming in there has been from people who are KYC'd. So I think you might see a shift from the completely decentralized protocols that we see now, and instead of taming or creating a circle around that for institutional specific, you're then taking it to the next level and saying, well, let's issue these things only to the whitelisted people. And then that way you have a clean asset to start with, a clean user group, a clean market to trade in. And I know probably what I've been saying here goes completely against some of the more liberal-minded, decentralized, global liquidity pool, convenience of running DeFi protocols. But I think the writing's on the wall that regulators are starting to look into this, and the view is that we should be proactive about this. Let's help the regulator understand what we're trying to do. Let's put the measures in place to create fair and orderly markets, some kind of investor protection, and then we meet the regulators halfway rather than battling with them and saying, look, we're beyond the law, we don't need to do anything. Has anyone got any questions? Cool. Either means that everyone disagrees completely with me or they completely agree, so yeah.
So what is your expectation regarding regulations? Will they agree? Do you have working papers?
So the question was, sorry, can you say it again?
So on the regulation side, the regulators, do you have the working pieces how they will adopt, or if they will adopt, or do you have talks going on already?
So the question there was, have I been talking to regulators and will they accept this kind of thing? The direct answer is no, not yet. But I have spoken to regulators previously before doing this project and talked through their concerns. There are projects that are looking to build on T-Grade who are in sandboxes or about to go in sandboxes. They've had discussions around the concept of a public permissioned blockchain, and the regulators seem to like the idea that there is this control, there is this kind of walled garden around the investors and the products that are being issued. So the short answer is it's a pretty good hunch, but at least it's the right step in the right direction. Going back to what I said about the key principles of regulation, what they care about is the fair and orderly markets and the investor protection. And I find it very hard if the regulators disagreed and said, well, what you've taken in steps there is wrong, because that's the principles they're working off. Yeah.
You mentioned MiCA.
Yeah.
Maybe you can also quickly talk about ESC 8 and how that affects you, or if it affects your platform at all.
Sorry, which regulation?
ESC 8.
DAC 8. I'm not familiar with that one. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, just like had a couple questions about the blockchain itself. Who's like running the validators? And like, is there a native T-Grade token?
Yeah. So we've got 70 validators lined up for mainnet launch, and we're launching in Q1 next year. So we've paid a lot of attention to keep the thing very decentralized, because if we're going to be attracting lots of assets on our chain, then decentralization is very, very important.
So the trusted circles are all running on the same.
Yeah, it's the same mainnet, and it's the local implementation is done by actors who want to create these trusted circles themselves. So they're the businesses that will form on top of the protocol, and we're just running the protocol. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much to the organizers.
Martin. Thanks so much, Martin. All right, another round of applause for